My uncle said I had to stay in here, the girl whispered. A Hell's Angel looked at the locked dog cage. The sky over the county road hung low and gray. The kind of autumn afternoon that felt like it couldn't decide between rain and just staying gloomy. Marcus Reed liked days like this. Fewer cars. Fewer people. Just him, his Harley, and the long ribbon of cracked asphalt cutting through empty farmland. He had the road mostly memorized by now. He'd ridden it 100 times before, back when he needed to think, or when he needed to not think at all. Today was the second kind of day. The clubhouse had been loud that morning, full of arguments about the new charity run and who was supposed to fix the ice machine, and Marcus had needed to get away from all of it. Just for a few hours. Just him and the engine and the wind. The trees along the road had already started turning, gold and rust-colored leaves clinging to branches that would be bare in a few weeks. Marcus breathed it in, the cold air sharp in his lungs, the smell of dead leaves and distant wood smoke. His leather jacket creaked as he shifted his weight, leaning into a long, lazy curve. That was when he heard it. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. Enoch. Small at first, easy to miss under the growl of the engine. Then another, harder, then a third, and the bike gave a stuttering lurch beneath him like it had missed a step going downstairs. "Come on," Marcus muttered. "Not now." He eased off the throttle, listening. The engine sputtered again, coughing like an old man with a bad chest. Marcus knew bikes. He'd been fixing them since he was 14 years old, elbow deep in grease under his uncle's carport, and he knew right away this wasn't something he could just ride through. Something deeper was wrong. Something that wanted attention now, not later. "Great," he said under his breath. "Just great." He scanned the road ahead, searching for some place to pull off. Out here, the shoulder was mostly gravel and drainage ditches, useless for a man about to have engine trouble. He needed flat ground. Some place with room to work if he had to strip the bike down. Then he saw it. A gravel drive, cutting off the main road to the left, half hidden behind a stand of overgrown bushes. It led up toward a farmhouse set back from the road, distant enough that Marcus almost missed it. He didn't have much choice. The engine knocked again, harder this time, and he felt the whole bike shudder beneath him like it was fighting to keep going. All right, he said, as if the bike could hear him. "I hear you." He turned the handlebars and eased onto the gravel drive, tires crunching over loose stones and stray weeds poking up through the cracks. The engine gave one more rattling cough, then finally settled into a rough, uneven idle as he came to a stop in front of the house. Marcus cut the engine. Silence rushed in to fill the space where the growl of the Harley had been. It was the kind of quiet that felt wrong somehow, too still. Too complete. No birds. No wind moving through the trees. No dog barking. No distant tractor. Nothing. He looked up at the house. It was old, the kind of place that had probably been somebody's pride once, a long time ago. Now the paint was peeling in long gray strips, and two of the front windows had been boarded over with plywood gone soft and dark from years of rain. The porch sagged in the middle like it was tired of holding itself up. The yard around it was a tangle of grass grown up past his knees, choking out what might have once been a garden. Marcus swung his leg off the bike and stood there a moment, taking it in. Something about the place made the hair on his arms stand up, though he couldn't have said why. Places went empty all the time out here. Farms failed. People moved on. It happened. He was reaching for his saddlebag, thinking about the tools inside, when he heard it. A sound. Thin and muffled, carried faint on the still air. It was coming from the barn. Marcus stood still, listening. There it was again. A thin, cracked sound, barely there, like it was trying not to be heard. It could have been a cat. It could have been the wind finding some gap in the old boards. But something in his gut told him it wasn't either of those things, and Marcus had learned a long time ago to trust his gut. It had kept him alive more than once. He looked at the barn. It stood maybe 50 yards from the house, gray wood gone soft with age, the roofline dipping in the middle like the spine of an old horse. One of the big sliding doors hung crooked on its track, leaving a gap just wide enough for a man to slip through sideways. Weeds had grown up thick around the base of the walls, and a rusted plow sat abandoned nearby, half swallowed by the grass, like the land was trying to pull it under. Marcus's hand found the pocket knife clipped inside his jeans, an old habit from years of riding through places where trouble could show up without warning. He didn't draw it. He just liked knowing it was there. "Hello?" He called out, his voice rough from disuse. It cut through the stillness, too loud in a place so quiet. "Anybody in there? You hurt?" Nothing answered. Even the crying sound had stopped now, like whatever made it had gone still, listening back. Marcus started walking toward the barn, his boots crunching over dead grass and gravel. Each step felt heavier than the last, though he couldn't say why. It was just an old barn. He'd seen 100 of them, all up and down these back roads, falling apart the same slow way, forgotten by whoever used to work them. But something about this one felt different. Wrong, somehow, in a way he couldn't put a name to. Maybe it was the silence. Maybe it was the way the whole property seemed to be holding its breath. "Hey," he called again, softer this time. "I ain't gonna hurt you." Bike broke down. Just checking things out. Still nothing, but now, closer, he thought he heard something else underneath the silence. A small, ragged breath. Someone trying very hard not to make a sound. He reached the door and paused, his hand resting flat against the old wood. It was cold under his palm, damp with the years. He could smell must and rot, old hay gone to dust, and beneath it, something sharper, something that made the muscles in his shoulders go tight. "I'm coming in," Marcus said, keeping his voice low and even, the way he might talk to a spooked animal. "Nothing to be scared of." He pushed on the door. It gave a long, groaning creak, metal track scraping against metal, the sound echoing through the barn's hollow dark. Dust drifted down from the rafters, caught in the thin gray light spilling through the gap. Marcus squinted, letting his eyes adjust, taking in the shapes around him. Old tools hanging crooked on the walls. A workbench buried under years of grime. Stacks of rotted wood in the corner. And then, he saw it. Tucked into the far corner of the barn, half hidden in shadow, sat a cage, not the kind you'd keep tools in. A dog cage, the wire kind, rusted through in places, big enough for a large animal. The door was shut tight, a heavy padlock hanging from the latch, dull with rust. Inside it, curled up small against the back wall, was a little girl. Marcus froze. She looked to be about 7 years old, though it was hard to tell. She was so thin. Her knees pulled tight against her chest, arms wrapped around her legs like she was trying to disappear into herself. Her hair was matted, tangled with straw and dirt, hanging in dull clumps around a face streaked with grime. Her clothes, what he could see of them, were filthy, torn at the collar, hanging loose off her small frame like they belonged to someone twice her size. Her eyes found his. They were wide, too wide, the whites showing all around, the kind of look that came from somewhere far past ordinary fear. She didn't move. She didn't make a sound. She just stared at him, frozen in place, like a rabbit caught in headlights, waiting to see what kind of monster had just walked through the door. Marcus stood there in the doorway, his boots rooted to the spot, his mind refusing to catch up with what his eyes were telling him. For a long moment, Marcus didn't move at all. He knew better than to rush at something so scared. He had spent enough years around wounded things, dogs, men, hearts, to know that fast movements only made the fear worse. So he went down slow. His knees cracked as he lowered himself to the dirt floor. Careful. Easy. The way a man might kneel before something holy. He kept his hands loose at his sides, palms open, showing her he wasn't holding anything, wasn't hiding anything. "Hey there," he said, and this time his voice came out softer than he thought a man his size could manage. "Hey, it's okay. I'm not gonna hurt you." The girl didn't answer. Her eyes stayed locked on him, wide and glassy, like she was watching a wolf circle closer. Her whole body had gone rigid, pressed back against the wire mesh like she was trying to push herself through it. Marcus stayed where he was. He didn't reach for the cage. He didn't reach for her. He just stayed low, at her level, letting the silence stretch out between them until it didn't feel so sharp anymore. "My name's Marcus," he said after a while. "I was riding my bike down the road there, and it broke down right in front of your house. Funniest thing. Been riding that bike 20 years, and it never quit on me like that before." He gave a small shrug, like it was nothing, like this was just an ordinary conversation between two ordinary people. "Then I heard you. Thought maybe you could use some company. Still nothing." But her breathing had changed, just slightly. Not so sharp now, not so much like she was bracing for a blow. "Can you tell me your name?" Marcus asked gently. "You don't have to, but I'd sure like to know it if that's okay." The girl's lips trembled. For a moment Marcus thought she wouldn't answer at all, that the fear had swallowed her voice hole and there'd be nothing left to reach. But then, so quiet he almost missed it, she said something. "Ren." It came out cracked, barely a whisper, like the word itself hurt to say. "Ren," Marcus repeated, like it was something precious, something he wanted to hold on to carefully. "That's a real pretty name, like the bird." She didn't answer that, but her eyes flickered, just a little, like something in her had noticed he'd said it kind. "Ren, honey, are you hurt anywhere?" Marcus asked, keeping his voice low and even like he was talking to a spooked colt. "Anywhere on your body feel bad? You don't have to point, just tell me if you can." She shook her head, small and quick, but Marcus saw the way her arms tightened around her knees, saw the way she flinched even at his gentle question, and he knew whatever was hurting her wasn't the kind of hurt you could point to on your skin. "Okay," he said softly. "Okay. That's good. That's real good, Ren." He let the quiet settle again, giving her room to breathe, giving himself a moment to keep his own voice steady, because something hot and furious was building behind his ribs, and he didn't want her to see it, didn't want her to think that anger was aimed anywhere near her. "Can you tell me how long you've been in there?" he asked finally. Her chin quivered. Her eyes dropped down to her knees, and when she spoke again, her voice broke apart into something small and tearful. "My uncle said I had to stay in here," she whispered, "because I'm too much trouble." The words hit Marcus like a fist to the chest. He felt them land somewhere deep, somewhere that would stay bruised long after this day was over. He didn't say anything right away. He couldn't. His jaw tightened, the muscle there jumping once, twice, his whole face going hard and still like stone. Slowly, without breaking his gentle voice, he said, "Ren, you are not too much trouble. Not even a little bit. You hear me?" She didn't answer, but she was looking at him now, really looking, like she wanted so badly to believe him. Marcus reached back toward his bike, toward the saddlebag hanging off the side, and pulled out the bolt cutters he kept for emergencies on the road. His hand closed tight around the handles. "Okay, Ren," Marcus said, shifting his weight so he could reach the padlock without getting too close, too fast. "I'm gonna get you out of there. That's all this is, just me getting you out." He set the bolt cutters against the rusted metal of the lock. The thing was old, orange with rust, the kind of lock that had been through 100 rainy seasons and never once been oiled. He worked the jaws open and closed them around the shackle, testing the fit. "This might make a noise," he warned her gently. A loud snap. "Don't you be scared now. That's just the lock breaking, not anything bad. I need you to trust me on that." Ren's eyes followed his hands, wary, but she didn't flinch away this time. She just watched, small and still, like a bird waiting to see which way the wind would blow. Marcus squeezed the handles. Nothing happened. The lock was stubborn, corroded shut from years of neglect. He adjusted his grip, planted his knees firmer into the dirt, and tried again, his big forearms flexing with the effort. "Come on now," he muttered under his breath, not to Ren, just to the lock itself, like it was something he could talk into surrender the same way he'd talked to her. "You're safe," he said again, louder this time so she'd hear it over the grinding metal. "Nobody's gonna hurt you no more, Ren. Not while I'm here. Not ever again if I got anything to say about it." Her breath hitched. He heard it, sharp and small, and he looked up to see her chin wobbling, her eyes filling with tears she seemed to be fighting with everything she had. "It's okay to cry," he told her, softer now. "You don't gotta be brave for me. You've been brave enough already, just surviving in here. Let it out if you need to." That seemed to break something loose in her, because her shoulders started to shake, silent sobs rolling through her thin body, and still she didn't make a sound, like she'd learned somewhere along the way that crying out loud only made things worse. Marcus pushed harder against the bolt cutters, his arms burned with the strain, sweat breaking out along his hairline despite the cool air of the barn. He thought about Dale's face, about a man who could lock a child up like a stray animal and go about his day, and the fury in his chest burned hotter. But he kept his voice gentle, kept it steady, because that fury wasn't for her to see. The lock gave a groan, then a screech of metal, and finally, with a sharp crack, it snapped open. "There it is," Marcus breathed, dropping the bolt cutters into the dirt beside him. "There it is, honey, you're free." He reached for the cage door, easing it open slow, the way he'd done everything else, giving her time, giving her room. Ren didn't move at first. She just stared at the open door like she didn't believe it, like it might be some kind of trick. "Come on out, Ren," Marcus said, holding his arms open but not reaching in, letting her choose. You come out whenever you're ready. I'll wait right here. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then, slowly, she uncurled from her huddled position, her thin legs wobbling as she crawled forward through the low door of the cage. Marcus caught her the second she was clear, scooping her up gently, careful of every bone in her small body, like she was made of glass. She was lighter than she should have been. Too light. Marcus felt that lightness settle into his chest like a stone. He shrugged out of his leather jacket, one arm at a time, keeping her steady against him, and wrapped it around her shivering frame. It swallowed her whole, the leather warm from his body heat, and she burrowed into it, into him, pressing her face against his shoulder and finally letting the sobs come loud, letting them shake through her like something breaking free. I got you, Marcus murmured into her hair, rocking her gently. I got you now. He pulled his phone from his pocket with one hand, holding her steady with the other, and dialed 911 first, then immediately called Big Sam. Marcus lowered himself to the barn floor, dirt and old straw crunching beneath him, and settled Wren onto his lap like she weighed nothing at all. He kept his voice low, the way you'd talk to a spooked horse, no sudden moves, no sharp edges. You want to sit like this a while? He asked. We can just sit. No rush. Wren nodded against his chest, her small fists curled into the leather of his jacket like she was afraid it might disappear if she let go. Can I ask you something? Marcus said. You don't gotta answer if you don't want. She didn't say anything, but she didn't shake her head either, so he took that as permission. When's the last time you had something to eat? Wren was quiet for a long moment. Her voice, when it came, was so small he almost missed it. Yesterday, she whispered. Uncle Dale gave me crackers. In the morning. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he kept his face soft, kept his hands gentle where they rested against her back. Yesterday morning, he repeated, like he was just making conversation, nothing more. That's a long time to go without eating. We're gonna fix that soon. Get you something warm in your belly. She nodded again, her cheek still pressed to his shoulder. You cold? He asked. A little. He tucked the jacket tighter around her shoulders, wrapping the collar up near her chin. Better? Better, she murmured. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the loose boards of the barn, and Wren flinched hard at the sound, her whole body going rigid against him. Hey, Marcus said quickly, keeping his voice down low and even. That's just the wind, just the barn creaking. Nothing's coming to get you. I'm right here. She relaxed slow, bit by bit, like a fist unclenching. You don't like loud things, Marcus said. Not a question. Just something he was learning about her, filing it away the way he'd file away the specs on an engine, the kind of thing you needed to know to fix it right. Uncle Dale yells, Wren said quietly. When he yells, bad things happen. Marcus felt that stone in his chest grow heavier, but he kept his tone gentle. I don't yell, he said. Well, not at kids. Not ever at kids. You don't gotta worry about that with me. She looked up at him then, just for a second, her eyes red-rimmed and swollen, searching his face like she was trying to decide if she believed him. Where's your mama at, Wren? Marcus asked. Careful. Soft. She know you're out here? Wren's lip trembled. I don't know, she said. She went away, a long time ago. Uncle Dale said she wasn't coming back. Marcus held her a little tighter, didn't say anything for a moment because he didn't trust his voice not to shake. A little girl, locked in a cage, No mama. No one checking on her, and a man who was supposed to look after her instead teaching her that yelling meant pain. Well, Marcus finally said, "You got me now. However that's gonna work out, however this all shakes down, you got me." "That's not nothing." Ren didn't answer, but she settled deeper into him, like some small part of her wanted to believe it. That's when he heard it, faint at first, far off down the county road, then growing, the wail of sirens cutting through the quiet of the farm. Ren's whole body tensed again, her fingers digging into his jacket. "Those sirens are for us?" she whispered, panic rising in her voice. "They're for us," Marcus said, "but not the bad kind. Those are the people who are gonna help. Police, ambulance, they're gonna make sure you're safe and warm and taken care of. You're not gonna leave?" Her voice cracked on the question, raw and small, like she already knew the answer to every question in her life had been yes. People leave. People always leave. Marcus tipped her chin up gently so she'd look at him, so she'd see he meant it. "I'm not going anywhere, kid," he said, his voice steady. Sure, the kind of promise he intended to keep no matter what it cost him. Not now. Not later. "I'm right here." The sirens grew louder, closer, until gravel crunched under tires and red and blue lights washed across the barn's open doorway. A sheriff's cruiser rolled to a stop in the driveway, an ambulance right behind it, doors already swinging open before the engines had even fully died. The paramedics had Ren wrapped in a silver blanket now, sitting on the edge of the ambulance bumper, a young woman with a stethoscope crouched in front of her, speaking in the same low, careful tone Marcus had used in the barn. Ren's eyes kept flicking past the paramedic's shoulder, searching, until they found Marcus standing a few feet away. He gave her a small nod. She held on to that nod like it was a rope thrown across water. "Sir, I need you to walk me through it one more time," the deputy said, notepad out, pen hovering. He was young, maybe 30, with a crew cut and the careful blankness of someone trying hard to look like nothing shook him. "You said the bike broke down out front?" "Radiator hose," Marcus said. "Pulled in to take a look under the hood. Heard crying coming from the barn. And you went in without waiting for us." It wasn't really a question, but Marcus answered it like one. "Wasn't gonna leave a kid locked in a cage while I waited on a phone call to go through dispatch. You'd have done the same." The deputy didn't argue that. He just wrote something down, jaw tight, and glanced over toward the barn where another officer was taking photographs of the rusted cage. The bent lock Marcus had cut clean through with the bolt cutters from his saddlebag. That's when the sound of a truck reached them, an old Ford with a bad muffler, rattling up the gravel drive too fast, kicking up dust behind it. The deputy's head turned first. Then Marcus's. The truck skidded to a stop at an angle, like whoever was driving hadn't fully thought about stopping until the last second. The door creaked open, and a man climbed out. He was maybe 50, thin in a way that looked more like neglect than fitness, with a scraggly beard and eyes that went wide and darted fast between the cruiser, the ambulance, and the barn. "What's going on?" the man said, his voice already too loud, too high. "What happened?" He stopped himself. Marcus saw it, the way the man's mouth snapped shut around the word he almost said, like he'd caught himself before naming the thing that would make this real. The deputy stepped forward, one hand resting near his belt, not on his weapon, just near it. "Are you Dale Whitfield?" "Yeah, that's me. This is my property. What's..." Dale's eyes landed on the ambulance, on the small shape wrapped in silver sitting on the bumper, and something in his face went slack. Not with grief, with fear, the particular fear of a man who knows exactly what's been found and is only now realizing there's no way to unfind it. "We're going to need you to answer some questions down at the station," the deputy said, his voice shifting into something harder, more official. "Would you like to tell me what that cage is doing in your barn, Mr. Whitfield?" Dale's mouth opened and closed. "She's my niece," he said finally, the words tumbling out fast, defensive. She wouldn't listen. I didn't know what else to. Marcus wasn't listening anymore. He was staring at Dale's face, really looking at it for the first time, past the panic and the sweat and the 2 days of stubble, and something cold dropped through his chest like a stone through still water. He knew that face. 2 years ago, that face had sat across from him at the clubhouse table, hands folded, voice thick with worry, talking about back taxes and a bank about to take the only thing he had left in the world. Marcus had pulled cash out of his own savings. No paperwork, no interest, just a handshake and his word. Because that's what you did for a man who had nobody else to turn to. That's what Dale had told him. Nobody else. No family. No wife, no kids, no one depending on him, nothing to lose but the land his daddy had left him. Marcus felt the blood drain out of his face, felt his own pulse go loud and strange in his ears. He looked from Dale to the ambulance, to Wren's small face peering out from the silver blanket, and back to Dale again. This was the same man, the same farm. The money Marcus had handed over to save this place, this exact patch of dirt and rusted tin roof, might have been the very thing that kept the walls standing around that cage. Marcus caught the deputy's arm before he could turn away. "Hey, I need to tell you something." The deputy looked at him, taking in the look on Marcus's face. Whatever the deputy saw there made him step aside, away from Dale, away from the ambulance, into the shade of a dead oak tree at the edge of the yard. "I know him," Marcus said. His voice came out rougher than he meant it to. "Dale, I know him." The deputy's pen stopped moving. "How do you know him?" Marcus rubbed a hand over his jaw. He felt sick, like something was crawling around inside his chest looking for a way out. 2 years back, he came to me, said the bank was fixing to take his land, said he had nobody, no family, nothing but that farm his daddy left him. I loaned him money. Cash, no paper, no interest. Just because he asked, and I had it to give. How much? Enough to save the place. Marcus swallowed. He never said a word about a niece. Never said a word about anybody living out here but him. I thought I was helping a man keep a roof over his own head. Turns out I might have been paying for the roof over that cage. The deputy wrote something down, slower this time, his young face working through what that meant. You're saying your money kept this property running. I'm saying I don't know for sure, but I can't stop asking myself the question. Marcus looked past the deputy's shoulder, back toward the ambulance, toward the small shape wrapped in silver. That's on me. Whatever else happens here, that part's mine to carry. The deputy didn't say anything comforting, because there wasn't anything comforting to say, and Marcus respected him for not trying. He just nodded once, tucked his notepad in his breast pocket, and walked back toward Dale, who was still talking too fast, still explaining himself to nobody in particular. Dale Whitfield, turn around and put your hands behind your back. Dale's whole body seemed to fold in on itself. Wait, come on, you don't understand. She's a hard kid. She don't listen. I didn't have a choice. You had a choice, the deputy said, snapping the cuffs shut with a hard click. You just made the wrong one. Marcus watched them walk Dale toward the cruiser, watched the man's shoulders hunch up around his ears like he could somehow disappear into himself, and felt no satisfaction in it at all. Just that same cold stone sitting heavy in his gut. A woman in a blazer had arrived while he wasn't watching, stepping carefully around the gravel in low heels, a laminated badge on a lanyard around her neck. She crouched down in front of Wren, speaking softly, the way you'd talk to a bird that might startle. Marcus moved closer, close enough to hear. Wren, honey, I'm Mrs. Alvarez. I work for the county. I'm going to help make sure you're safe tonight, okay? We're going to find you a nice place to stay, just for now, with some very kind people. Wren's whole body went rigid. Her eyes shot past Mrs. Alvarez, past the paramedic, straight to Marcus, wide and scared in a way that hit him harder than anything had all night, like she was drowning, and he was the only thing floating nearby. Strangers, Wren whispered. Just that one word, but it carried the whole cage in it, the whole barn. Every hour she'd spent locked up not knowing who might come through that door next. That was enough. Marcus stepped forward before he'd even decided to, his boots crunching on the gravel, and stopped right beside Mrs. Alvarez. She's not going anywhere alone, he said. His voice came out steady, low, final. I'm not walking away from this. Mrs. Alvarez looked up at him, taking in the leather vest, the tattoos crawling up his forearms, the size of him standing there in the fading light. Whatever she was about to say, whatever policy or procedure was sitting on the tip of her tongue, she paused instead, glancing between Marcus and the small girl who hadn't taken her eyes off him since the ambulance doors opened. Marcus hadn't slept. He'd tried, lying on top of the covers in his clothes, staring at the ceiling of his room above the clubhouse garage, but every time he closed his eyes, he saw the same thing. That cage. Those thin arms wrapped around bony knees. The way her voice had cracked on the word strangers like it cost her everything to say it. By 5 a.m, he'd given up on sleep entirely. He made coffee he didn't drink, sat on the back steps and watched the sun come up over the tree line, and thought about a little girl waking up in a shelter surrounded by people she'd never met, in a building that wasn't home, with nobody there who knew her name meant Wren, and not just the Whitfield case. He was in the parking lot of the County Child Services office by 7:30, 45 minutes before it opened. He sat in his truck, engine off, hands on the wheel, watching the front doors like they might open on their own if he stared hard enough. His knee bounced. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this useless. When a woman finally came and unlocked the doors at 8:15, Marcus was out of the truck before she'd even turned the key all the way. He crossed the lot fast, boots hitting pavement hard, and pushed through the glass doors right behind her. I need to see Mrs. Alvarez, he said. The receptionist, a young man with a coffee mug in one hand, looked up startled at the size of him filling the doorway. Tell her it's about Wren Whitfield. Tell her Marcus Reed is here and he's not leaving till somebody talks to him. Something in his voice must have carried, because the young man didn't argue. He picked up the phone, said a few quiet words, and 5 minutes later, Mrs. Alvarez came around the corner, still in yesterday's blazer, a paper coffee cup in one hand, and a look on her face that was somewhere between exhaustion and surprise. Mr. Reed, she said. You're here early. I didn't sleep, Marcus said, which wasn't an answer to anything, but was the truest thing he had to offer. I need to know she's okay. I need to know where she is, and if she's scared, and if anybody's sitting with her. Mrs. Alvarez studied him a moment, then gestured toward a small office off the hallway. Come sit down. He didn't want to sit. Sitting felt like giving up ground, but he followed her in anyway, folded his big frame into a chair that felt too small for him, and waited while she settled behind a desk cluttered with folders and framed photos of kids that weren't Ren. She's at an emergency shelter about 20 minutes from here, Mrs. Alvarez said. She had a rough night. Didn't sleep much, from what the staff told me. She asked about you. Something in Marcus's chest cracked open at that. She asked about me. She wanted to know if the loud man was coming back. Mrs. Alvarez almost smiled, tired as she looked. That's what she called you. The loud man. Marcus pressed his knuckles against his mouth for a second, steadying himself. Where does this go from here? What happens to her? Mrs. Alvarez folded her hands on the desk. We're required to search for family first. Parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, anyone with a legal claim. Right now, Ren has no other immediate family on file. Her mother passed a few years back. Dale was listed as her only guardian. Until we can locate someone else, or until the court decides otherwise, she'll need a suitable temporary placement while the investigation into Dale continues. Suitable placement, Marcus repeated. That mean a stranger's house? Some family she's never met? It means whoever the county determines can provide a safe, stable environment. She watched him carefully. It's not usually a fast process, Mr. Reed. Marcus sat there a long moment, staring at his own hands, scarred and rough. Hands that had fixed 100 engines and thrown a few punches in his younger days and never once, not one single time, held anything as small and breakable as that girl in the barn. What would it take, he said slowly, the words coming out of him before he'd fully decided to say them, for me to be considered? For that placement. Me? Mrs. Alvarez blinked, clearly not expecting it. Marcus almost didn't believe he'd said it either. But once the words were out in the room, hanging there between them, he found he didn't want to take them back. Mrs. Alvarez hadn't said no. That was the thing Marcus kept turning over in his mind as he climbed back into his truck. She hadn't said no. She'd said it was complicated. She'd said a single man, alone with his history and his club and his garage full of motorcycles, wasn't exactly what a judge liked to see on a placement form. But she hadn't said no. He knew exactly what he needed to do next. There was only one person in his life steady enough, respected enough, and good enough to stand next to him and make this work. He started the truck and drove straight to Dolores's house. She lived in a small brick house on the edge of town, the kind with a tidy front porch and flower boxes under the windows, nothing like what people expected from a woman who'd spent 30 years married to a Hell's Angel. Her husband, Tom, had been gone 6 years now, but the club never stopped treating her like family. She still came to every barbecue. She still patched up scraped knuckles and stitched up cuts when the guys didn't want to explain themselves at a hospital. Marcus knocked hard, 3 times, the way he always did, and Dolores opened the door already frowning at him. "You look like you haven't slept," she said. "I haven't." She stepped back and waved him inside. The house smelled like coffee and lemon cleaner. A police scanner murmured quietly on the kitchen counter, an old habit from her nursing days that she'd never broken. She poured him a cup of coffee without asking if he wanted one and set it in front of him at the kitchen table. "Talk," she said, sitting down across from him. So he did. He told her everything: the barn, the cage, the whisper about the uncle, the ambulance ride, the sheriff, and now the shelter 20 minutes away where a little girl was asking if the loud man was coming back. Dolores listened without interrupting, her jaw tightening more with every detail, her hands wrapped tight around her own mug. When he got to the part about asking Mrs. Alvarez if he could be considered for placement, Dolores set her coffee down slowly. "You asked to take her in. By yourself." "I did." "Marcus." She said his name the way she used to say it when he was younger and reckless, half warning, half worry. "You know how that looks. A single man, a biker, no wife, no family in the house. They're not going to hand a traumatized 7-year-old girl over to that. Not without a fight." "I know." He rubbed a hand over his face. "That's why I'm here." Dolores went quiet for a second, studying him. "You're asking me to help. I'm asking if you'd be part of it, if you'd let it be both of us. A joint placement, or whatever they call it. You've got the nursing background, you've got the standing in this town, you've got a house with an actual room that isn't full of motorcycle parts." He paused. She needs someone soft around her too. Someone who knows how to sit with a scared kid and not scare her worse. Dolores didn't answer right away. She looked toward the hallway, toward the small guest room she'd always kept made up out of habit, the one with the quilt her mother had sewn folded neatly at the foot of the bed, the one that had sat empty since Tom passed. "There's a bed in there already," she said quietly, almost to herself. "I'd need to move some boxes, get some fresh sheets, maybe a nightlight. Kids like nightlights, don't they? Especially after something like that." She was already halfway somewhere else in her mind, already rearranging furniture that hadn't been touched in years, already thinking of a little girl she'd never met. "Dolores," she looked back at him, and there wasn't a shred of hesitation left in her face. "Of course I'll help you, Marcus. You didn't even have to ask twice." She stood up from the table so fast her chair scraped against the floor. "Get your keys. We're going down there right now, before that woman finishes her second cup of coffee and moves on to some other case that doesn't need us the way this one does." Marcus felt something in his chest loosen for the first time since he'd found that cage. He stood too, draining the last of his coffee in one swallow. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet." Dolores grabbed her purse off the counter and headed for the door. "Thank me once we've got that paperwork signed and that baby girl sleeping under my roof." Together they walked out to Marcus's truck, and he pulled out of the driveway heading straight back toward the county office. Mrs. Alvarez's office smelled like old paper and burnt coffee. She sat behind a desk covered in files, glasses pushed up on her head, phone pressed to her ear for what felt like the 100th time that morning. Marcus and Dolores sat across from her in two stiff plastic chairs, waiting. "I understand, Mrs." Alvarez was saying into the phone. "Yes, I'll have the paperwork faxed over by noon." She hung up and rubbed her eyes before looking at the two of them. "All right," she said. "Here's where we stand." Marcus leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "A joint temporary placement is unusual," Mrs. Alvarez continued, "but not unheard of. Given Dolores's nursing background, her standing in the community, and the fact that she owns her home outright and has no criminal record of any kind," she glanced pointedly at Marcus. "I'm willing to recommend her as primary guardian for the emergency placement." "And me?" Marcus asked. You'd be listed as a supporting figure, not a guardian. Not yet. That means you can be present, you can help with her care, but any major decisions go through Dolores and through this office. She folded her hands on the desk. It's not everything you wanted, Marcus, but it's something. And it means Wren doesn't go to a group home tonight. Marcus felt his throat tighten. That's enough, he said. That's more than enough. Dolores reached over and squeezed his arm. Mrs. Alvarez slid a stack of papers across the desk. Sign here, here, and here. I'll need copies of your ID, Dolores, and I'll need to do a walkthrough of your house sometime this week. Just a formality since we're moving so fast on this. But for today, she paused, and for the first time since Marcus had met her, something softened in her tired face. For today, let's go get that little girl. The shelter was a squat brick building on the edge of town, the kind of place with fluorescent lights and a waiting room full of mismatched chairs. A young woman at the front desk led them back through a hallway lined with closed doors until they reached a small room with a single window and a cot pushed against the wall. Wren sat on the edge of the cot, feet not quite touching the floor, wearing clothes that were clean now but still hung loose on her thin frame. In her arms she clutched a small stuffed rabbit, gray and worn soft at the ears, the kind of toy shelters kept in a bin for moments exactly like this one. Her eyes darted up when the door opened, and Marcus watched her whole body go rigid, ready to flinch. Then she saw him. Something in her shoulders loosened, just barely, just enough for Marcus to notice. "Hey there," he said quietly, crouching down so he wasn't towering over her. "Remember me?" Wren nodded, small and slow, her chin dipping toward the rabbit in her arms. "This is my friend Dolores," Marcus said, nodding toward her. "She's got a real nice house, with a real nice room, and she makes real good pancakes. You hungry?" Wren's eyes flicked to Dolores, taking her in, the soft gray hair, the kind lines around her eyes, the way she stood without any sudden movements. Dolores didn't rush her. She just smiled, gentle and easy, and said, "I've got a nightlight shaped like a moon. Thought you might like it." Wren didn't answer, but she didn't look away either. The young woman from the front desk helped Wren gather the few things she had: a small bag with a change of clothes, a toothbrush still in its plastic wrapper. When it was time to go, Wren stood slowly, still holding the rabbit tight against her chest, and looked between the two adults like she wasn't sure which way was safe. Marcus knelt down again and held out his hand, palm up, the way you'd offer something to a scared animal you didn't want to spook. "I'll walk you out," he said. "You don't have to hold it if you don't want to." For a long moment, Wren just stared at his hand, at the tattoos crawling up his knuckles, at the size of it compared to her own small fingers. Then, slowly, carefully, she reached out and slipped her hand into his. They walked together down the hallway, out through the front doors, into the bright afternoon light. Halfway to the truck, Wren tugged gently on his hand to make him slow down, and she looked up at him with her wide, careful eyes. "You're the loud man with the soft eyes," she whispered. Marcus fell into a routine without ever really deciding to. Every day when he closed up the shop and washed the grease off his hands, he drove straight to Dolores's little blue house on Maple Street. He never came empty-handed. The first day, it was a coloring book with a fat pack of crayons. The second day, it was a small toy motorcycle, chrome and red, that he'd found in the bin at the hardware store. He set it on the porch railing without a word and waited to see what Wren would do. She didn't touch it right away. She watched it from the window for almost an hour before she finally crept out and picked it up, turning it over in her hands like she was checking if it was real. "That one's got real wheels," Marcus told her, sitting on the porch steps, not looking at her too directly. "Spins and everything." Wren spun the wheel with one finger. She didn't smile, not yet, but she didn't put it down either. Dolores watched all this from the kitchen window, drying a plate with a dish towel, and she caught Marcus's eye once through the glass and gave him a small nod. It was working, slow as it was. The days blurred together after that. Marcus would come by around 5, sometimes with a gift, sometimes just with himself, and he'd sit wherever Wren was, on the porch, in the living room, at the kitchen table, while Dolores cooked. He never pushed. If Wren wanted to talk, he listened. If she didn't, he just sat there, steady as a rock, letting his presence be enough. But the fear hadn't left her. Not really. A car backfiring down the street sent her scrambling under the kitchen table, and it took Dolores nearly 10 minutes of soft talking to coax her back out. The vacuum cleaner made her cover her ears and rock back and forth until Marcus turned it off and knelt beside her, saying her name over and over until she came back to herself. And every night, no matter how tired she was, Wren refused to let anyone close her bedroom door. Dolores tried once, gently, and Wren's whole body had gone stiff, her breath coming fast and shallow, her eyes locked on that door like it might swallow her. Dolores never tried again. The door stayed open, a sliver of hallway light spilling across the floor of her room every night like a promise. One evening, Marcus stayed later than usual. Dolores's porch step had been sagging for weeks, the wood soft and splintering at the edge, and he'd finally found time to fix it. He knelt in the dark with a flashlight propped against the railing, hammering in new boards while the crickets sang around him and the house glowed warm and yellow behind its curtains. He was almost done, just tightening the last screw, when the scream came. It ripped through the quiet night, high and raw and full of terror, and Marcus was up the porch steps and through the front door before he even realized he'd dropped his tools. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart slamming against his ribs, and burst into the hallway just as Dolores came out of her own room, tying her robe. "Nightmare," she said. "Breathless, she gets them. Bad ones." Marcus didn't answer. He was already at Wren's door, and there she was, sitting bolt upright in bed, tangled in her blankets, sobbing so hard her whole small body shook. Dolores moved past him to sit beside her, murmuring soft words, rubbing slow circles on her back, but Wren's eyes were wide open and unseeing, still lost somewhere in the dark of whatever memory had chased her awake. "I'm right here," Marcus said quietly from the doorway. He didn't go in. Something told him not to crowd her, not tonight. "I'm not going anywhere, Wren. I'll be right outside." He lowered himself down to the floor in the hallway, his back against the wall beside her door, and he stayed there. All night. He didn't move when his back ached from the hard floor. He didn't move when the house grew quiet again, and Dolores finally slipped back to her own room, exhausted. He just sat there, in the dark hallway, listening to Wren's breathing even out, ready to be there the second she needed him. When the sun came up and pale light crept through the hallway window, Wren's door creaked open. She stood there in her pajamas, hair messy, eyes puffy from crying, staring down at Marcus sitting stiff and tired on the floor. "You stayed," she whispered. "Told you I would." Wren looked at him for a long moment, then ducked her head, shy and small. "Thank you," she said, so quiet he almost missed it. A week later, Marcus stood in the gravel lot outside the clubhouse, his hand resting on Wren's small shoulder, and for the first time in years, he felt nervous. The clubhouse was an old warehouse the chapter had fixed up themselves. Metal walls, a gravel yard full of motorcycles lined up in neat rows, and a faded painted sign over the door that just said Reedsville Chapter in big block letters. To most folks in town, it looked like trouble. To Marcus, it had always just looked like home. But looking down at Wren, her small hand gripping the hem of his shirt, her eyes wide as she took in the rumble of engines and the loud laughter spilling out from the open bay doors, he wondered if he'd made a mistake bringing her here. "You don't have to go in if you don't want to," he told her, crouching down to her level. "We can wait in the truck." Wren shook her head, though her grip on his shirt tightened. "I want to stay with you." "Okay." Marcus stood back up, took a slow breath, and pushed open the door. The noise hit them first, deep laughter, someone's radio playing classic rock, the clank of tools against metal. A dozen men in leather vests turned at once, and for a second, Marcus saw the whole room the way Wren must be seeing it. Big men. Tattoos, scars, beards, loud voices. Wren froze in the doorway. But then Big Sam, all 6.5 feet of him, spotted her, and his whole face changed. He set down the wrench he'd been holding and lowered himself onto one knee so he wasn't towering over her anymore. "Well, look who it is," he said, his voice suddenly soft, careful, like he was talking to something fragile. "You must be Wren. Marcus here's told us all about you." Wren peeked out from behind Marcus's leg, but didn't answer. "You like bikes?" Big Sam asked, nodding toward the motorcycle he'd been working on, its engine exposed, parts laid out neat on a rag. "I could use some help. Got a real important job if you're interested." Wren looked up at Marcus, silently asking permission. He gave her a small nod. Slowly, she stepped forward. Big Sam showed her how to hold a rag, how to wipe grease off a chain without getting her fingers caught, his huge hands moving slow and gentle around her small ones. He talked to her the whole time, not baby talk, just steady and calm, explaining what each part was for, letting her ask questions when she had them. Marcus watched from a few feet away, arms crossed, throat tight, as one by one the other men found small excuses to wander over. Not crowding her, just close enough to be near. Across the shop, a wiry man everyone called Tiny, on account of him being anything but, was setting up a griddle on a folding table. He caught Marcus's eye and grinned. "Heard she likes pancakes," Tiny said. "Got the good syrup, the real maple kind, not that fake stuff." "She hasn't said much about food," Marcus admitted. "Dolores told me. Said it's her favorite." Tiny cracked an egg into a bowl like it was the easiest thing in the world. Every kid deserves good pancakes. 20 minutes later, Wren sat on an overturned bucket next to Big Sam, her hands black with grease, a smear of it on her cheek where she'd wiped her face, and she was laughing. It wasn't a big laugh. It wasn't loud. But it was real, bright and surprised, like it had slipped out before she could stop it. Because Big Sam had made some joke about the bike being ticklish when she touched a certain wire, and his exaggerated yelp had caught her so off guard that the laugh just came bursting out of her. Marcus felt it hit him square in the chest. He hadn't heard her laugh. Not once. Not since the barn, not since the cage, not in all the weeks since he'd carried her out into the daylight wrapped in his jacket. He'd seen her smile, small and careful, but never this. Never a real laugh, unguarded and light, the kind that only comes from a kid who feels, just for a moment, completely safe. His eyes stung, and he had to look away, blinking hard, pretending to check something on a nearby bike so none of his brothers would see a Hell's Angel getting choked up over pancakes and grease-stained hands. Tiny flipped a pancake high in the air, and Ren clapped, and Big Sam pretended to catch it in his mouth and missed on purpose, and the whole garage erupted into laughter. Marcus stood there in the middle of it, tools forgotten, and let himself feel it. The weeks that followed took on a shape Marcus hadn't dared hope for. Every Tuesday and Thursday, he drove Ren into town for her sessions with Dr. Patterson, a soft-spoken counselor Mrs. Alvarez had recommended. The first few visits, Ren clung to his hand in the waiting room like she was afraid the walls might close in on her. But Dr. Patterson had a way about her. Patient and unhurried, never pushing too hard. She kept a basket of toys in the corner and let Ren play while they talked, and slowly, session by session, Ren started talking back. Marcus never asked what they discussed in there. That wasn't his to know. But he noticed the changes anyway. The way Ren stopped flinching quite so hard when a door slammed. The way she started sleeping through most nights instead of waking up screaming. Small things. But they added up like coins in a jar, and Marcus watched the jar fill with something like hope. It was Dolores who pushed for the school. She needs kids her own age, Dolores said one evening, sitting across from Marcus at her kitchen table, a cup of coffee steaming between her hands. She needs to learn what it feels like to just be a kid again. Not a case. Not a victim. Just a second grader who likes recess and hates math homework. Marcus had worried it would be too much, too fast. But Dolores was right, the way she usually was. The morning Ren started at Reedsville Elementary, she wore a backpack Dolores had picked out, purple with a cartoon fox on it, and she gripped Marcus's hand tight in the school parking lot. "You'll be right here," she said. Not quite a question. "Right here," Marcus promised. Same spot. 3:15. She let go of his hand and walked through the doors without looking back, and Marcus stood there in the parking lot for a full minute before he trusted his legs to carry him back to the truck. She came home that first day quiet, but not the old quiet, the scared kind. This was a thinking kind of quiet. At dinner, she told Dolores about a girl named Priya who sat next to her and had a lunchbox shaped like a unicorn. Small thing. But it was a story, freely given, and Marcus and Dolores both leaned in like it was the most important news in the world. The eating came slower than the talking. But it came. At first, Ren still ate careful small bites, like she was afraid the food might disappear if she didn't guard it. She'd glance up between bites, checking faces, checking the room, like some old habit was still running underneath her skin. Marcus understood that particular fear better than most. A body that had learned hunger could take a long time trusting that the next meal was coming. But little by little, the checking stopped. She started eating at a normal pace. She started leaving food on her plate sometimes, something Dolores said was actually a good sign, proof that some part of her finally believed there'd be more tomorrow. By the 6th week, it had become a Sunday tradition. Dinner at Dolores's house, the three of them around her worn oak table with the lace tablecloth that had belonged to her mother. Dolores always cooked too much food: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans with bacon, cornbread that came out of the oven so soft it practically melted. That particular Sunday, the late afternoon sun slanted gold through Dolores's kitchen window, catching the steam rising off the food. Wren sat between them, her hair in the 2 neat braids Dolores had taught herself to do special for her, and she was telling them about a spelling test she'd aced that week. "Mrs. Holloway said I spelled every word right," Wren said, practically glowing. "Even the hard one." "Rhinoceros, that's a heck of a word," Marcus said, genuinely impressed. Wren nodded proudly and reached for another piece of cornbread. Then she looked at her plate, empty now except for a few crumbs, and without any hesitation at all, without glancing up to check if it was allowed, she reached for the serving dish in the middle of the table. "Can I have more chicken?" she asked, already spooning mashed potatoes onto her plate before anyone answered. "And potatoes too, please." It was such a small thing, such an ordinary thing. A kid asking for seconds at dinner. But over Wren's head, Marcus caught Dolores's eyes, and something passed between them, warm and quiet and full, a whole conversation without a single word spoken. "Look how far she's come." The first time Marcus felt the stares, he almost laughed. He was standing outside Reedsville Elementary, leaning against his truck in the pickup line, and 3 mothers by the flagpole went quiet the second he walked up. They looked at his leather vest, then at each other, then back at him, like he was a bear that had wandered into the schoolyard. He was used to it. 20 years riding with the club had taught him that people saw the patches before they saw the man. Usually, he didn't care. Usually he just climbed back on his bike and let them think whatever they wanted. But now there was Wren, walking out those double doors with her purple backpack bouncing, and Marcus found he cared a whole lot more than he used to about what those mothers thought when they looked at him. The whispers followed him other places too. At the grocery store, a woman he didn't know pulled her cart a little wider around him in the cereal aisle. At the hardware store, the clerk rang him up quick and quiet, eyes down, like Marcus might do something unpredictable if he lingered too long at the counter. Old habits, old fears. Marcus understood it. Didn't much like it, but he understood it. Then, slow as spring thaw, something started to shift. It was Wren's school talent show that did it, or at least started it. Marcus hadn't wanted to go, worried his size and his leather and his tattoos would stick out in that gymnasium full of soccer moms and khaki pants, worried he'd embarrass her somehow just by being himself. But Wren had asked him special, tugging on his sleeve the night before. "You have to come," she'd said. "You're my person." So he'd gone. Sat in a folding chair too small for him, knees practically up to his chest, and watched Wren stand on that stage and recite a poem about spring flowers, her voice shaking only a little. When she found him in the crowd afterward, he'd clapped louder than anybody in that gym. Mrs. Holloway, her teacher, caught him on the way out. She was a small woman with silver hair and kind eyes, and Marcus braced himself for whatever she was about to say. "Mr. Reed," she said instead, "thank you for coming tonight." It meant the world to her. You could see it on her face the whole time she was up there, looking for you. Marcus didn't quite know what to do with that. He just nodded, throat tight, and mumbled something about wouldn't have missed it. A few days later, Dolores took Wren into town for ice cream, and Marcus tagged along, sitting outside on the bench while the 2 of them went in. When they came out, Wren was holding a cone stacked high with 2 scoops of strawberry, grinning ear to ear. "Mr. Pruitt said it was free," she told him, climbing up onto the bench beside him. "He said I earned it for being so polite." Marcus looked through the window at Old Man Pruitt, who ran the ice cream shop and had never once, in all Marcus's years riding through town, given him so much as a nod of hello. Pruitt caught his eye and gave a small wave. Marcus waved back, feeling something loosen in his chest that he hadn't known was tight. It kept happening. Little moments stacking up like the coins in that jar of hope he'd been watching fill for weeks. A shopkeeper who used to look away now said good morning. A woman at the pharmacy asked after Wren by name, like she'd been following the story same as everybody else in a town that size. The morning it really landed, though, was at the diner. Marcus had taken Wren there for pancakes before school, a Friday treat they'd started doing most weeks. She'd eaten 2 whole ones, syrup sticky on her chin, chattering about a class project on butterflies. When it was time to go, Marcus pulled out his wallet at the counter, same as always. The owner, a heavy-set man named Earl, who'd run the place for 30 years, waved him off before he could even open it. "It's on the house," Earl said. "Earl, come on now. That's twice this month." Earl leaned in a little, voice dropping low, quiet enough that Wren, already halfway to the door with her backpack, wouldn't hear. "What you're doing for that girl," Earl said, "matters more than any patch on your back." Marcus stood there a second, wallet still in his hand, and something in him settled like a stone finding the bottom of a still pond. He nodded once, throat too tight for words, and followed Wren out into the morning light. The law office sat above the hardware store on Main Street, up a narrow staircase that creaked under Marcus's boots. He'd worn his cleanest shirt, the one without oil stains, and left his leather vest hanging in the truck. Dolores had told him to do that. "You don't need to hide who you are," she'd said, "but let the lawyer see the man first. The patches can wait." The attorney's name was Grace Whitfield, a trim woman in her 50s with silver-rimmed glasses and a handshake firmer than Marcus expected. Her office was small but tidy, law books lining one wall, a window looking out over the street below. She gestured for him to sit, and he folded his big frame into a chair that felt too delicate for him. "Dolores speaks highly of you," Grace said, opening a folder on her desk. "Says you've been Wren's rock these past months." "Trying to be," Marcus said. Grace studied him for a moment, the kind of look that took in everything, the tattoos climbing up his neck, the calluses on his hands, the way he sat like a man used to being judged before he opened his mouth. "I'm going to be straight with you, Mr. Reed," she said. "A guardianship petition like this is never simple, but given your background, the club affiliation, the courts are going to look at every detail. They'll want home studies, character references, financial records. They may ask about your history, arrests, associations, all of it." "I've got nothing to hide," Marcus said. "Never done time. Never touched that girl with anything but kindness." "I believe you," Grace said. "But belief isn't evidence. We're going to need to build a case, brick by brick, that shows the court exactly who you are and what you've done for Wren. That means references from the community, teachers, neighbors, business owners. And yes, your club brothers too, if they're willing to stand up and be counted." Marcus thought of Earl at the diner, of Mrs. Holloway's kind eyes, of Old Man Pruitt waving through the ice cream shop window. Word had already started spreading through town like a warm current, carrying him along without him even asking. "I think we can get that," he said. "Good, because this will take months, Mr. Reed, maybe longer." The court moves slow, especially in cases like this. where the child has no history with you before circumstance threw you together. They'll want to make sure this isn't a whim, that it's built to last. It's built to last, Marcus said, and there was nothing false in his voice. Grace studied him a moment longer, then nodded slow, like she'd found the answer she was looking for. She slid a stack of papers across the desk, along with a pen. Then let's get started. Marcus signed his name at the bottom of each page, his handwriting rough and blocky, nothing fancy about it. But his hand didn't shake. Not once. That night, after Dolores had gone home and the house had settled into its quiet evening hum, Marcus found Wren at the kitchen table, coloring a picture of a butterfly with wings the color of sunset. He pulled out the chair across from her and sat down, elbows on the table, feeling bigger and clumsier than he ever had in his life. "Wren," he said, "I want to talk to you about something." She looked up, crayon still in hand, her eyes careful the way they always got when grown-ups said her name like that. "I went and saw a lawyer today," Marcus said. "Somebody who helps people become family. Official-like, in the eyes of the law. I want to be your guardian, Wren, not just for now. For good, if that's something you want too." For a moment she just looked at him, crayon forgotten in her small fingers, and Marcus's chest went tight, with worry that he'd said it wrong. Said it too fast. Asked for something she wasn't ready to give. Then she was out of her chair, and across the kitchen, arms wrapping around his neck so hard it nearly knocked the wind out of him, her face pressed into his shoulder. It was the first time she'd ever thrown herself at him like that. First time she'd reached for him instead of waiting to be reached for. Marcus wrapped his arms around her small frame. Careful, gentle, holding on like she was the only solid thing in the world. "Yes," she whispered into his shirt. "Yes, yes, yes." The clubhouse smelled like charcoal smoke and cut grass. Somebody had strung up old Christmas lights along the porch rail even though it was the middle of summer, because Big Sam said Wren deserved lights no matter the season. The picnic tables sagged under paper plates piled high with burgers and corn on the cob, and somewhere behind the garage a radio played classic rock low enough that it hummed under the laughter instead of drowning it out. Wren sat on the top step with a paper crown Dolores had made her out of a pizza box, gold marker letters spelling out Princess of the Road. She wore it like it was made of real jewels. Big Sam had spent the last hour teaching her how to check tire pressure on his Harley, and she'd taken to it with the seriousness of a surgeon, tongue poking out the corner of her mouth in concentration. Court dates set. Grace had told Marcus that morning, and he'd felt something in his chest unclench that had been tight for months. 6 weeks. 6 weeks until a judge would sign a paper and make official what had already been true in every way that mattered since the day he cut that lock with his own hands. He'd told the club at lunch. By the time evening rolled around, half the chapter had shown up with coolers and folding chairs, ready to celebrate like the hearing was already decided. Marcus stood near the grill, spatula in hand, watching Wren laugh at something Big Sam said, her whole face lit up gold in the evening light. Dolores came to stand beside him, arms crossed, a soft smile on her face. "Look at her," Dolores said. "Never seen a kid come so far." "Wouldn't have without you," Marcus said. "Wouldn't have without you either," she said back, bumping his arm with her elbow. His phone buzzed in his pocket. He almost let it go to voicemail, wanting to stay in this moment a little longer, wanting to just watch Wren wear her paper crown and laugh with grease-stained hands. but it was Mrs. Alvarez's name on the screen, and something in him, some old instinct built from years of bad news arriving at good times, made him step away from the noise and answer. "Mr. Reed," she said, and her voice had a weight to it he didn't like. Careful, measured, the voice of someone choosing words with tweezers. "Mrs. Alvarez," he said, walking further from the picnic tables, toward the quiet edge of the gravel lot. "Everything all right? I need you to sit down if you can." "I'm standing at a barbecue," Marcus said. "Just tell me." There was a pause on the line, long enough that Marcus's stomach started to sink before she even spoke again. "A woman came into our office this afternoon," Mrs. Alvarez said. "Her name is Ruth. She says she's Wren's grandmother, her mother's mother." Marcus felt the ground tilt under him, just slightly, like the gravel had shifted. "Wren doesn't have a grandmother," he said. "There's nobody." That's what the file said. That's what Dale said. "We believed she'd passed years ago," Mrs. Alvarez said. "There was a death certificate on record, a mix-up with another woman of the same name in the county system. This Ruth has been searching for her granddaughter since her daughter died. She had no idea Dale had guardianship. No idea he'd hidden Wren away from her." Marcus's mouth went dry. "So what does this mean?" "It means we have to pause the guardianship proceedings," Mrs. Alvarez said, gentle but firm, like she was bracing for the blow to land. "We have to investigate her claim. If it's legitimate, if she's truly blood family and fit to care for Wren, the court has to consider her petition alongside yours." "I'm sorry, Marcus. I know this isn't what you wanted to hear tonight." Marcus stood frozen, phone pressed hard against his ear. The sounds of the barbecue behind him suddenly distant, muffled, like he was hearing it through water. He didn't notice Wren had wandered close, paper crown slipping sideways on her head, until he turned and saw her standing a few feet away, small and still, her eyes wide with a fear he hadn't seen in weeks. She'd heard enough. Grandmother, investigate, pause. Her face had gone pale, the color drained clean out of it, and her hands had curled into small fists at her sides, the paper crown sliding off her head and drifting to the gravel without either of them noticing it fall. The party had ended fast after that. Big Sam had scooped up the fallen paper crown, quiet for once, and the coolers got packed up without anyone saying much. Wren hadn't screamed or cried. That was the worst part. She'd just gone still, like a light switching off, and let Marcus carry her to the truck without a single word the whole ride home. Now, back at the house, her bedroom door was shut tight, and had been for almost an hour. Dolores sat cross-legged on the hallway floor outside it, her back against the wall, voice low and steady through the wood. "Wren, honey, it's just me out here. Nobody's coming in unless you want them to. You hear me?" "Silence. I brought your blanket. The soft one with the stars on it. I can slide it under the door if you want." Still nothing, just the faint sound of breathing on the other side, quick and shallow, the kind of breathing Dolores recognized from her nursing days. Fear breathing. She'd heard it in emergency rooms 1,000 times, in patients who were braced for pain before it even came. Downstairs, Marcus paced the length of the living room like a caged animal. 6 steps to the window, 6 steps back to the couch, over and over, his boots heavy on the old wood floor. His hands wouldn't stay still. He kept opening and closing them like they wanted something to hold on to, and couldn't find it. "She's not coming out," he said more to himself than anyone, on his 9th or 10th pass. "She thinks we're sending her off somewhere. She thinks this is it. She's scared. Dolores called down the stairs, loud enough for him to hear. Give her time. But time felt like the enemy right now. Every minute Wren sat behind that door, believing she was going to lose everything again, was a minute that clawed something back that had taken months to build. Marcus thought of the cage in that barn, the way she'd curled into herself, knees to her chest, eyes wide and empty. He thought he'd never see that look on her again. Now here it was, back, just from a phone call. He stopped pacing and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes. I can't fix this by fixing something, he muttered. There's no bolt cutter for this. Dolores appeared at the top of the stairs. She'd given up on the door for a moment, come to check on him instead. She doesn't need you to fix it, Marcus. She needs you to be there. That's different. I don't know how to do that part, he admitted, and his voice cracked, just slightly, an old rusted hinge giving way. I know how to show up. I know how to break locks. I don't know what to say to a kid who thinks her whole world's about to get pulled out from under her again. Dolores looked at him for a long moment, something soft and knowing in her eyes. Then, don't say anything smart. Just say true. Marcus climbed the stairs slow, like his boots weighed twice what they usually did. Dolores squeezed his arm as she passed him going down, giving him the hallway, giving him the door. He lowered himself down in front of it, joints protesting, until he was sitting on the floor same as Dolores had been, back against the wall right beside the frame. Through the thin gap under the door, he could see a sliver of lamplight and the shadow of small feet somewhere near the bed. Wren, he said quietly. It's Marcus. No answer, but the breathing on the other side seemed to slow, just a little, like she was listening. I know you heard some of what I was talking about tonight. And I know it scared you. I'm not going to lie to you and say there's nothing going on. Because you're smarter than that, and you deserve the truth. He rubbed a hand over his face, choosing his words the way Dolores had told him to. True, not smart. There's a woman. Says she's your grandma. We don't know everything yet. But here's what I do know, and I need you to hear this part real good. His voice dropped lower, steadier. Nobody is taking you anywhere without you knowing about it first. Nobody is making choices about your life without you having a say. I don't care what any judge or paper says. I am not going anywhere, Wren. Not unless you want me to. He sat with that a moment, letting it settle into the quiet. Then, slow as anything, the door cracked open an inch, and one wide brown eye appeared in the gap, full of questions too big for a 7-year-old to carry alone. The apartment building sat on a quiet street 2 towns over, brick and plain, the kind of place with flower boxes that somebody still bothered to water even though nobody seemed to notice them. Marcus parked his bike at the curb and sat there a minute, engine ticking as it cooled, working up the nerve to do something that scared him more than any fight he'd ever been in. He'd told himself the whole ride over that he wasn't going to like this woman. Didn't matter what Mrs. Alvarez said about her being legitimate, about the blood test confirming what she claimed. Didn't matter that the woman had a right to see her own granddaughter. All Marcus could think about was Wren's face pressed in that door crack last night, that one wide eye full of fear, and how easy it would be for some stranger to undo everything they'd built just by existing. He climbed the stairs to apartment 4B with his jaw set tight, ready to be angry, ready to look this Ruth woman in the eye and let her know exactly what was at stake if she tried to make things hard. She opened the door before he even knocked twice. Ruth was smaller than he expected. Thin, silver-haired, with the kind of stooped shoulders that came from carrying something heavy for a long time, even if that something wasn't physical. She wore a cardigan buttoned all the way up despite the warm afternoon, and her hands trembled slightly as she pulled the door wide. "You must be Marcus," she said, her voice soft, cracked at the edges like old paper. "Please, come in. I've been hoping you'd come." That threw him off some. He'd expected defensiveness, maybe even a fight. Not this. The apartment was small and neat, but every surface told the same story. Photographs, dozens of them, propped on shelves, taped to the walls, spread across the coffee table like she'd been going through them recently and hadn't bothered to put them away. Marcus's eyes moved over them without meaning to. A little girl with dark hair, missing a front tooth, grinning at the camera. The same girl a few years older, sitting on a porch swing. Older still, in a graduation gown, looking so much like Wren around the eyes that Marcus felt something catch in his chest. "That's Melissa," Ruth said, following his gaze. "Wren's mother. My daughter." She said it like the words still hurt to speak out loud, even now. "Please, sit," she said, gesturing to a worn armchair across from a couch covered in more photographs. Marcus sat, feeling too big for the small room, too rough for the delicate lace doilies on the armrests. Ruth lowered herself onto the couch slow, careful, the way people move when their bones have started arguing with them. She picked up one photograph, held it a moment, then set it down like it cost her something. "I need you to understand something," she said, looking at him directly now, her eyes wet but steady. "I did not know. About Dale. About any of it." Marcus said nothing, just watched her, still braced for a fight he was starting to realize wasn't coming. "Melissa and I had a falling out. Years back. Foolish things. The kind of things that feel so important at the time and so small once somebody's gone." Her voice wavered. "We didn't speak for a long while. I didn't even know she'd had a baby until after she'd already passed. By the time I found out, Wren was already living with Dale, and he told the courts I couldn't be found. Told them I was dead, if you can believe that." She reached for a tissue from a box on the side table, dabbed at her eyes with a hand that shook. "I have spent over a year looking for that girl," she said. "Hired a man to search records, wrote letters that got sent back. I nearly gave up more than once. I want you to know that. I did not abandon her. I did not know where she was, and I did not know what that man was doing to her." The anger Marcus had carried up those stairs, the tight coil of it in his chest, began to loosen. He looked at the photographs scattered across every surface, at this small, trembling woman surrounded by pictures of a daughter she'd lost and a granddaughter she'd spent a year searching for, and something in him softened despite himself. "I believe you," he said quietly, and meant it. Ruth set the tissue down and pushed herself up from the couch with a small grunt. "I'm being a terrible host," she said. "You'll have tea. I won't hear otherwise." She shuffled into the tiny kitchen before Marcus could argue. He heard the clink of cups, the whistle of a kettle that must have already been warm on the stove. He sat there in the too small armchair, looking at the photographs again, at Melissa growing up frame by frame across the walls of a life Ruth had tried to hold on to. Ruth came back carrying a tray with 2 flowered teacups that looked like they belonged to another century. She set it on the coffee table, nudging photographs aside to make room, and handed Marcus a cup that looked almost comical in his big, scarred hands. "Careful," she said. "It's hot." He took a sip anyway, more to have something to do than because he wanted it. It was sweet, too sweet, but he didn't say anything. Ruth settled back onto the couch and wrapped both hands around her own cup like she needed the warmth of it. "Melissa was headstrong," she said, staring past him at nothing in particular. "Got that from her father, God rest him. We fought about everything near the end. Money, the men she dated, the way she was raising herself, if you want to know the truth, since I couldn't seem to say 2 words to her without it turning into a battle." She shook her head slow. "The last real conversation we had, I told her she was making a mess of her life. She told me I could stay out of it. And then she did exactly that. Stayed out of my life, I mean. Stopped calling. Stopped answering when I called her." Her voice cracked again, thinner this time. "I told myself I'd give her time. Let her cool off, and then I'd reach out again. Do it right. I kept telling myself that for 3 years, Marcus. 3 years, and then I got a call from a stranger telling me my daughter had died in a car accident, and I hadn't spoken to her in all that time." Marcus felt something twist low in his gut. Something that had nothing to do with Ruth and everything to do with his own life. His own regrets stacked up quiet in the corners of his mind. He didn't say anything yet, just let her keep going. "I never got to fix it," Ruth said. "Never got to tell her I was sorry, or hear her say she forgave me, or wasn't. And then I found out she'd had a baby I never even knew about, and that baby was living with a man who locked her in a cage." Her hands trembled hard enough that tea sloshed near the rim of her cup. She set it down before it spilled. "You cannot know what that does to a person. To think you failed your daughter, and then to think you're failing her child too, all in the same breath." The room went quiet, except for the tick of a clock somewhere in the kitchen. Marcus turned his own cup slow in his hands, feeling the weight of something building in his chest. Something he hadn't said out loud to anybody yet. Not even Dolores. "I loaned Dale money," he said finally. His voice came out rougher than he meant it to. 2 years back. He came to me saying he was about to lose the farm, said he didn't have nobody else to turn to, said he was all alone out there. He stared at the floor. I gave it to him because I believed him. Never once thought to ask if there was a kid in that house, and the whole time, she was out there, in that barn. He looked up at Ruth, and for the first time since he'd walked in, he let her see what he was carrying. I keep thinking, if I'd asked one more question, if I'd driven out there just once to check how he was doing with the money, I might have found her years sooner. Ruth didn't say the easy thing. Didn't tell him it wasn't his fault. Not right away. She just looked at him with those wet, steady eyes, and something passed between them, something like recognition. "We're both carrying the same guilt," she said quietly. "Just came at it from different doors." Marcus nodded slow. "I'm scared," he admitted, the word feeling strange and heavy in his mouth. "Scared that if you win this hearing, I lose her. Scared she'll think I didn't fight for her." Ruth reached across the space between them and rested her thin, trembling hand on his forearm, right over a faded tattoo. "Then don't let it be a fight," she said. "Come to that hearing with me. Not against me, for her." Marcus looked down at her hand on his arm, then back up at her face. "All right," he said. Together then, the courtroom smelled like old paper and floor polish. Marcus sat stiff in a suit he had borrowed from Big Sam, the collar too tight around his thick neck, his hands folded on the table in front of him, like he wasn't sure what else to do with them. Ruth sat beside him, not across from him, her purse in her lap, her silver hair pinned back neat. They had walked in together that morning, side by side, and the caseworker, Mrs. Alvarez, had raised an eyebrow at the sight of it, but said nothing. The judge was a woman with silver streaks in her dark hair and reading glasses pushed low on her nose. She had listened for almost an hour now. Marcus had spoken about the barn, about the guilt that never let go of him, about pancakes and bicycle lessons, and a little girl learning to laugh again inside a clubhouse full of leather and loud engines. Ruth had spoken about Melissa, about the years lost, about the ache of finding out she had a granddaughter only after everything had already gone wrong. Neither one of them had said a single bad word about the other. The judge took off her glasses and set them down on the folder in front of her. She looked out over the courtroom, past the lawyers, past Mrs. Alvarez, to the small girl sitting in the second row between Dolores and an empty chair that had been left open just for this moment. "Wren," the judge said, gentle as anything, "would you come up here for a minute? You don't have to be scared. Nobody is going to make you do anything you don't want to do. I just want to hear what you think." Dolores squeezed Wren's hand once before letting her go. Wren slid off the bench, her sneakers scuffing soft against the floor, and walked up to the small chair set beside the judge's bench, the one made for kids who had to say hard things in hard rooms. She sat down and looked so small there, swallowed up by the space around her, her hands folded tight in her lap the way Marcus had seen her do 100 times when she was trying not to cry. "Sweetheart," the judge said, "I know grown-ups have been talking a lot today. I know some of it might not make a lot of sense. So I want to ask you something simple. Do you know who that woman is, sitting there next to Marcus?" Wren nodded. "That's Ruth," she said, her voice small but steady. "She's my grandma." "That's right," the judge said. "And do you want to get to know her? Spend time with her? Learn about your mom through her?" Wren was quiet for a second. Her eyes flicked toward Ruth, and something soft passed over her face, something curious and a little hopeful. "Yeah," she said. "I want to know her. I never had a grandma before." The judge nodded slow, like she expected that answer, like it made her heart a little lighter to hear it. "Okay," she said. "That's good, Wren. That's real good." She leaned forward just slightly. "But I want to ask you one more thing, and I want you to know there's no wrong answer here. If your grandma gets to take care of you, that might mean some changes. It might mean less time with Marcus, less time at the clubhouse with all your friends there. How does that make you feel?" Wren's chin trembled. She looked down at her hands, then back up, and when she spoke, her voice came out clearer than anyone expected, steady in a way that made the whole room go still. "I don't want to lose him," she said. "Marcus is the loud man with the soft eyes. He found me. He didn't leave." She glanced toward Dolores, toward the empty chair beside her that had been saved just in case. "And Dolores and Big Sam and everybody at the clubhouse, they're my family too. I want to know my grandma. But I don't want to pick. I don't want to lose anybody again." The courtroom went silent. Even the court reporter's fingers stopped moving over her keys. The judge sat back in her chair, and for a long moment, she simply looked at the little girl in front of her, something bright and wet gathering behind her eyes before she blinked it away. "We'll take a 15-minute recess," the judge said, gathering her folder. "I want to think this through carefully. This is not a decision I intend to rush." The bailiff said something about the courtroom clearing, and people stood, chairs scraping against the old wood floor. Marcus stayed frozen for a second, watching Wren climb down from the little chair and run straight into Dolores's arms, burying her face in the woman's shoulder. His chest felt tight, like someone had wrapped a chain around his ribs and pulled it snug. He pushed through the doors into the hallway, needing air, needing space, needing something to do with his hands. The hallway was long and quiet, lined with wooden benches and tall windows that let in thin bars of gray afternoon light. He found himself standing near one of those windows, staring out at the parking lot where his Harley sat next to Ruth's old sedan, 2 different lives parked side by side. Marcus, he turned. Ruth had followed him out, her purse still clutched in both hands, her silver hair catching the light from the window. She looked tired in a way that went deeper than the day, tired in a way that came from years of carrying something heavy alone. "You did good in there," Marcus said, because he didn't know what else to say. "You didn't have to say all that about Melissa, about the fight you two had." That was hard to hear. It was harder to say. Ruth stepped closer, and there was something steady in her eyes, something that reminded him of the way Wren looked at him when she was about to say something true. "But I needed the judge to understand. I needed her to see I'm not here to take anything away from anybody. I'm here because I lost my daughter, and I nearly lost my granddaughter too. And I am done losing people I love without a fight." Marcus nodded slow, his jaw tight. "I get that. Do you?" Ruth tilted her head. "Because I've been watching you all morning, Marcus. I've been watching you for weeks now, actually. I've seen the way that little girl looks at you. Like you hung the moon and fixed it with a wrench while you were up there." A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth, but it faded fast into something more serious. "I know what you sacrificed for her. The lawyers. The nights you didn't sleep. The way you turned your whole life inside out for a child who wasn't even yours by blood." "She's mine," Marcus said, the words coming out rough, almost before he meant to say them. "Not by blood. But she's mine." "I know." Ruth reached out and put a hand on his arm, her grip surprisingly firm for someone so small and gray-haired. "That's exactly why I need you to hear me right now. Whatever happens in there, whatever that judge decides, I am not going to be the reason you disappear from that little girl's life. You hear me? I don't care what piece of paper says who her guardian is. You found her in that cage. You broke the lock. You gave her a family when she had nothing left. That doesn't just go away because I showed up late." Marcus's throat felt thick. He looked down at the floor, at his scuffed boots against the tile, and for a second he couldn't trust his own voice. "I mean it," Ruth said, softer now. "You are part of her life. Permanently. I will fight for that in there just as hard as I fought for my own place in it. She doesn't have to choose. Neither do I." Marcus looked up at her, and something in his chest loosened, just a little, like a knot finally giving way after being pulled tight for weeks. "Thank you," he said, and his voice cracked on the words in a way that surprised him. Ruth patted his arm once, then let go. "Don't thank me yet," she said, a small, tired smile crossing her face. "Let's go see what that judge decides." They stood there another moment, side by the window, watching the light shift across the parking lot, until the bailiff opened the courtroom doors and called them back inside. The judge's ruling had come down 2 weeks later, and true to her word, Ruth had not disappeared. She had done something even better. She had stayed. The little blue house 3 doors down from Dolores went up for rent in September, and by October, Ruth's old sedan was parked in its gravel driveway. A row of potted mums lining the porch steps like she'd always lived there. She didn't have much. A few boxes of dishes, a rocking chair that had belonged to her mother, photographs of Melissa as a little girl that she hung carefully in the hallway where Wren would see them every time she visited. It wasn't a big house. It didn't need to be. It just needed to be close. Dolores was the first one to bring over a casserole. Standing on Ruth's porch with a dish towel draped over her arm and a look on her face that said she wasn't leaving until she'd had a real conversation. The 2 women had circled each other carefully at first, polite and a little stiff, both of them fiercely protective of the same small girl in different ways. But it didn't take long for the walls to come down. "You raised boys," Ruth said one afternoon, the 2 of them sitting on her back steps while Wren chased fireflies in the yard. "I raised a daughter. Neither one of us knows the first thing about doing this together." "Nope," Dolores agreed, sipping her sweet tea. "But I figure we'll learn." And they did. Ruth learned that Wren liked her pancakes cut into triangles, not squares, a detail Dolores passed along without being asked. Dolores learned that Ruth made the best biscuits either of them had ever tasted, and soon Sunday mornings meant biscuits at Ruth's table before the whole crew rode out somewhere together. The 2 women started talking on the phone most evenings, comparing notes on Wren's school day. Her nightmares. The little victories that felt like fireworks going off in both their chests. Ruth would call and say, "She asked me about her mama today, and I didn't cry until after we hung up," and Dolores would say, "That's growth, Ruth. That's real growth." They became something neither of them expected. Not just neighbors. Not just 2 women sharing custody of a little girl's heart. Friends, the kind that show up unannounced with coffee and don't need an invitation. By the time the first real chill of autumn settled over the town, Wren had a rhythm. Weekdays with Ruth, learning to bake and hearing stories about her mother as a girl. Weekends split between Ruth's porch swing and the roar and rumble of the clubhouse, where Big Sam still let her ride on the back of his bike around the gravel lot at approximately 3 miles an hour, both of them grinning like fools. That particular Saturday, Wren had stayed with Ruth first, helping her plant tulip bulbs for spring even though Ruth kept saying, "You won't even remember planting these by the time they bloom," and Wren kept saying, "I'll remember. Grandma, I promise." Sunday, Marcus picked her up on his bike, her small helmet snapped tight under her chin, and they roared off toward the clubhouse where half the chapter had gathered for Sunday dinner, plates of ribs and corn, and Dolores's famous potato salad spread across 3 long picnic tables pushed together under the string lights. Wren sat between Marcus and Big Sam, her feet swinging under the table, a smear of barbecue sauce on her chin that nobody bothered to wipe off. The whole yard was loud with laughter and the clink of forks, engines still ticking as they cooled in the driveway, somebody's radio playing low from an open garage door. "So," Dolores said, leaning across the table with a grin, "how was your weekend, baby girl? Busy few days for you." Wren considered this with the seriousness of a much older person, chewing thoughtfully before she answered. "I planted flowers with Grandma Ruth," she announced, loud enough for half the table to hear. "And I rode on Big Sam's bike. And I ate pancakes twice." She paused, looking around at the table full of leather vests and tattooed arms, and Dolores's warm, waiting smile, and something like pure joy lit up her whole face. "I have 2 homes now," she said proudly, and 100 uncles. The table erupted. Big Sam nearly choked on his sweet tea, slapping his chest and laughing so hard tears came to his eyes. Marcus threw his head back and laughed too, a real laugh. The kind that came from somewhere deep and long unused. Even the quietest brothers at the far end of the table were grinning, raising their cups like it was a toast. The idea had come from Big Sam, of all people, though he liked to say it was Wren's idea really, since she was the one who started it all without even knowing it. "We ought to do something," he'd said one Sunday, wiping barbecue sauce off his beard. Something for kids like her. Kids stuck in bad spots with nobody coming for them. Marcus hadn't said much at first. He'd just nodded slow, the way he did when something was settling into him deep. By the next week, he'd called a chapter meeting, and by the end of that meeting, the first annual Wren's Ride for foster kids was born. It took 2 months to plan. Dolores handled the paperwork, setting up a fund through the county so every dollar raised would go straight to foster families needing help with clothes, school supplies, and Christmas presents for kids who might not get any otherwise. Ruth baked pies to sell at a table near the starting line. Mrs. Alvarez, the caseworker who'd once eyed Marcus with such caution, became one of their biggest supporters, spreading word through every office and church bulletin board she could find. The morning of the ride, Main Street looked like nothing anyone in town had seen before. Rows of motorcycles lined up outside the hardware store, chrome catching the early sun, leather vests and patches everywhere you looked. But mixed in among the bikers were minivans and pickup trucks, families who'd signed up to ride along in cars. Kids waving handmade signs that said things like, "Every kid deserves a home and foster love." Shop owners who once locked their doors a little tighter when bikers rolled through town had folding tables set up on the sidewalk, selling lemonade and cookies, donating half their earnings to the cause. The woman who ran the flower shop, who used to cross the street rather than walk past the clubhouse, stood on her porch with a tray of muffins for anyone who wanted one. The barber who'd once complained loudly about those thugs moving into town now wore a bright yellow shirt that said volunteer across the back, directing traffic with a whistle around his neck. Marcus stood by his bike, checking the sidecar one more time, tightening the little harness Dolores had insisted on, testing it twice, even though he'd already tested it 3 times before. Wren stood next to him in her small helmet, decorated with stickers she'd picked out herself. Mostly stars, and one very determined-looking cartoon dog. "You ready, kid?" Marcus asked, crouching down to check the strap under her chin. "Been ready," Wren said, grinning up at him, and something in her voice made his chest tighten in that good, aching way it always did now when he thought about how far she'd come. Ruth appeared at his elbow, tucking a light jacket around Wren's shoulders even though the day was warm. Because that was Ruth. Always fussing, always loving in that particular way grandmothers did. "You hold on tight," she told Wren, kissing the top of her helmet. "And you wave to everybody. You hear me? Show them how brave you are." "I will, Grandma." Dolores climbed onto the back of Big Sam's bike, waving her scarf like a flag, hollering something about how she hadn't ridden in years, but by golly she wasn't missing this. The whole chapter revved their engines together, a low-rolling thunder that used to make people flinch and now made the crowd cheer. Marcus lifted Wren into the sidecar, tucking the blanket around her legs, and climbed onto his bike. He looked back once, just to see her settled, her small hands gripping the sides, her face lit up with pure excitement. "Let's show them what family looks like," he said, more to himself than to her. The engines roared to life all at once, 100 bikes rumbling down Main Street in a slow, proud parade, flags snapping in the wind, horns honking from cars pulled over to watch. Wren sat up as tall as she could in the sidecar, one small hand raised high, waving at every single person she passed, her face bright with a joy that used to seem impossible. The crowd lining the sidewalks cheered louder with every block, shop owners and mail carriers and church ladies standing shoulder to shoulder with leather-clad bikers, clapping, whistling, waving back at the little girl in the sidecar like she was the guest of honor at her own parade. That evening, the clubhouse glowed with string lights Big Sam had wound around the rafters, the kind you'd see at a fair. Somebody had set up folding tables covered in checkered cloths, and the smell of grilled burgers and corn on the cob filled the air. Music played low from an old speaker, something with a steady beat that made Dolores tap her foot without even noticing she was doing it. Wren sat on a stack of crates near the food table, her legs swinging, her cheeks still pink from the wind of the ride. She'd talked more that day than Marcus had heard her talk in weeks, telling anyone who'd listen about the crowds, the honking horns, the lady who gave her a free cookie shaped like a star. "You were something else out there," Big Sam told her, ruffling her hair as he passed with a plate piled high with ribs, waving like the Queen of Main Street. Wren giggled. "I was not. We're two," Dolores said, settling into a chair with a groan and a smile. "Prettiest float in the whole parade, and you didn't even have a float." Ruth sat beside her, a paper plate balanced on her knees, watching Wren with the soft, quiet look she always got when she thought nobody was paying attention. It was the look of someone who still couldn't quite believe her luck, like she was afraid if she blinked too long, the moment might slip away. Marcus stood near the grill, flipping burgers, listening to the laughter around him, feeling something warm settle deep in his chest. It had been a good day. A day he never could have imagined a year ago, back when his life was just engines and open roads and nothing much else. After supper, when the paper plates were cleared, and the sky outside had gone the color of a bruised peach, Wren slipped away from the table. Marcus didn't notice at first, too busy laughing at something Dolores said, but then he felt a small tug on his sleeve. "Marcus," Wren said, her voice quiet in that way it got when something mattered to her. "I made you something." He turned, wiping his hands on a rag, and crouched down to her level, the way he always did when she wanted to tell him something important. "Yeah? What's that, kid?" She held out her hand. In her small palm sat a little patch, roughly cut, the edges a bit uneven, stitched by hand with thread that didn't quite match. The letters were a little crooked, some bigger than others, but there was no mistaking what it said. "Family." Marcus stared at it for a long moment, his throat suddenly tight. "Dolores helped me with the needle," Wren admitted, glancing over at Dolores, who gave a small nod, her eyes suspiciously shiny. "But I did the sewing." "Mostly, you made this," Marcus said, his voice rough. "For me?" Wren nodded, suddenly shy, looking down at her shoes. "You always got that family thing on your jacket, the patches and stuff. But you didn't have one that said the actual word. So I thought you should have one that just says it plain." Marcus felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been closed up tight for a long, long time. He blinked hard, but it didn't stop the tears from coming, sliding down into the gray of his beard before he could catch them. "Marcus?" Wren asked, worried. "Did I do something wrong?" "No," he said, pulling her into a hug so tight it made her laugh. "No, Baby girl, you did everything right." He didn't wait. He couldn't wait. Right there, in front of everyone, he asked Big Sam for a needle and thread, and even though his big rough hands weren't made for delicate work, he sat down at the table and stitched that little patch onto his vest himself, right next to his club insignia, his hands shaking the whole time. When he held it up for everyone to see, the whole room erupted into cheers. Dolores wiping her eyes with a napkin, Ruth pressing a hand to her heart, Big Sam whooping loud enough to rattle the windows. Marcus pulled the vest on and looked down at the patch, right there next to the insignia he'd worn for 20 years. Family. Plain as day. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.